I can see them here actually. All right. Thanks very much, Neil. Hi guys, I'm Joe. I'm the ADOS at IH Bristol. I'm a teacher and a teacher trainer on our certificate and DIP courses. I'd like to look at just a number of techniques which you might be able to use to expand your repertoire of classroom feedback, whether it's teacher to students, students to teacher, or students to students. Okay. Hopefully, here are some of the things you'll get out of this session. I do have more slides than I've got time to show, and that is deliberate. The idea is that you can download the slides and then have a read at your leisure, just one or two more things that I've thought of, and have a look at some references and links. Okay, so why do we do feedback? I've got some ideas down at the bottom there in blue, which hopefully are pretty obvious. I just want to talk about the top ones. Sometimes I say to training teachers, in what way are you more than just an activity manager? And one of the ways that they are is through developing their feedback skills and giving effective, focused feedback to students. So I think it's important that we can develop that. And in fact, in studies of evidence-based teaching, feedback is one of the main factors that leads to improved learning for students. Also, helping students to notice the gap between the language that they're using now and perhaps more effective, more natural English. So you can put up some phrases on the board that you've maybe you can think of a more obvious way to say it. Just put it up and say, guys, I think you were trying to say this. This is another way to say it. And often students are really keen to write down what advice you've given them. And lastly, to celebrate achievements. It's very easy when you're a new teacher just to focus on errors and answers. But if you're celebrating students trying hard, listening to each other well, and producing some nice language, then you're creating a positive environment for them. Okay, so what is feedback? For me, it's a cycle. So it's really important that you have an outcome to an activity that you're doing, not just saying to students, read this, saying to them, read this, and see if you can find an interesting quote to tell your partner, or what 3 things did you find most interesting or controversial. Something like that gives you something to talk about in the feedback phase. And the other thing that I think is really important is good monitoring. I think you should have an idea of how well your students have performed before you get to the feedback phase, because that's what makes your feedback targeted and more effective. Okay, so some things that you can put into feedback. Sometimes teachers, we all do it, I guess, we say, well done. It's not sincere, it's a transition marker. It's what Scott Thornbury calls ritualized behavior. And I think that's something we need to minimize. So saying things like, well done for this, the way you used blah, blah, blah was really natural, can really help students. And it's an opportunity to reinforce the behavior that you want, especially for young learners. Next thing, reformulation. I've already talked about that, so we'll move on. And pretty obvious answers. Guys, consider not giving evidence for reading answers all the time, but only where it's necessary. If students have all got a reading answer right, you don't need to elicit evidence from them, but don't forget to talk about the evidence if students aren't quite sure, and that comes from good monitoring, of course. Instruction is what I'm just talking about teaching there. We're trained to do those things on our certificate courses, errors, concept checking, re-explaining. Strategies, though, I think it's really important, especially if you're an exam teacher, that you do activities before class and you reflect on how you've done something, so that you can join in a discussion with students at the end and perhaps suggest some ways that they could change their strategies, change how they do things. When I'm teaching exam classes, on the whiteboard I'll have a key language column, but also I'll have key strategies, a summary column, and at the end of the feedback and discussion on strategies, I'll just put some notes up there, and students are often really keen to write those down and then just try different things when they're practicing their exams outside class. And then evaluation. This is one of the things that we do well because we are expert speakers. We can show students the effect that their language, their communication has on us. We can give them suggestions about how to improve. Students can evaluate each other, of course. If you're worried about doing that, if you think the students don't trust each other, why not start with them just giving positive feedback to each other, first of all. You might notice, guys, a word on the screen. This is my subliminal message, praise. I've already talked about it. I think it's really important. Just a few more. Phonology. So there's something that's really easy to do. While students are talking, just jot down a few words or phrases that they're not pronouncing very effectively. Put them up on the whiteboard in a corner, perhaps. I put them in the bottom left-hand corner of my board. And I say, students, in pairs, 20 seconds, how do you say these phrases? It's a very easy activity. You can monitor and see what the problems are for everybody. Do a quick bit of drilling, and in 1 minute, you've done some personalized, focused phonology with your students. So that can really work well. And it's a very simple idea. Useful language. This morning I was teaching the phrase, oops on me, I'm going to pay for something. And an example I gave was, this rounds on me. I then got students talking about some of the vocabulary from the lesson, and lots of them focused on rounds and buying drinks and pubs, and they made it very clear that they're interested in that. So in my feedback, I gave them some extra language. It's not what they were trying to use, but it's something that was obviously relevant to them. Okay. Repetition. When students are talking, obviously there's a high degree of cognitive challenge the first time they're trying to use new language. So think about, at the end of feedback, repeating tasks so students can use the same language more effectively, more fluently, or they can experiment with the language, other language that you've taught them. And responding to content. Showing students that you value their opinions. And being sincere with that, rather than just a token, that's interesting. Okay, guys, hopefully you can see another word there, purr. I could have put a lovely picture of a cute cat on, but I'm much too sophisticated for that. Okay, just some tips. Do obviously vary what techniques you use in feedback, and don't use too many of these techniques at once. In my diploma observations, when I was doing the diploma, I discovered that experienced teachers tend to spend about the same time on feedback as they do on the actual activity, unless it's listening, where they actually got up to perhaps twice as long on the feedback as the listening activity itself. But as a rule of thumb, I'd say don't spend any longer on that, otherwise it can become too heavy for the students. Right, okay. Over to you now, guys. This was an advanced class. The students were doing a speaking activity about music. Apart from error correction, which of the techniques that I just talked about, or the content I've just talked about, do you think I was focusing on with this board feedback? Can you just type some ideas in? Right, anything else? What were the ticks for? Okay. Okay, great. Have a look at the answers. So reformulation applies to this one here, error correction, praise. Eclectic, I had an eclectic taste in something. That was language that they didn't use, but I knew from, because I knew my students, that that would be something useful for them. So that was very popular. Everyone noted it down. I drilled it with them quickly. Guys, this took about 5 minutes. Sorry, the feedback took about 4 minutes, and the actual activity took about 5 minutes. So I was mixing it up a bit, but it doesn't have to take too long. I'm aware that I've only got about 30 seconds, and Neil wants me to finish